journalist, and I'm a big fan of the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment goes much farther, for example, than the rules in the UK in terms of protecting people, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think? I mean, you live here now. What do you think of the First Amendment?
There's no way I'm going to talk about that. What I'll say to that is...
Prince Harry, the self-appointed crusader for censorship. You know, the guy who bailed on royal duties just to barge into our free speech debate with unsolicited advice straight from the censorship playbook. Harry is acutely aware of the repercussions he would face should he once again openly challenge American civil liberties. That is why Harry's book recommendation offers us a window into his mindset, revealing a clear intent to erode one of our fundamental rights. His contempt for the First Amendment is steeped in privilege, ignorance, and an overt anti-free speech stance, perfectly aligned with the interests of the globalist elites. Don't go anywhere because I'm going to be unpacking all of this. You don't want to miss it. All this and more on The Royal Grift. This is your daily dose of all things royal.
Actually, I'll plug her book. Dr. Marianne Franks. Do you know what I mean?
I don't.
So Dr. Marianne Franks has just written a book called Fearless Speech, Chapter 4. I highly recommend it for you. You guys more than welcome to read it as well. But I'm in the process of reading that at the moment, and I think it really encapsulates and explains the current situation with regard free speech, and how in Chapter 4 specifically how social media has done a very good job in defining reckless speech.
Defining reckless speech, and what is that definition?
Read the book. Read the book, man.
Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. The book that Harry is talking about and recommending, Chapter 4, is this one, Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment. This subtitle alone should tell you exactly what Harry's agenda is. Let's start with Harry's glowing endorsement of Chapter 4, Burning Down the Public Square. This chapter is the author's manifesto for reimagining free speech by tearing down the traditional public square. She claims that the First Amendment's neutrality perpetuates inequality by protecting reckless speech, speech that supposedly amplifies harm and reinforces privilege. She proposes a system that prioritizes fearless speech, truth-telling, from marginalized voices over harmful, chaotic noise from the powerful. Harry and Meghan, of course, ate this up like it was their last meal. Why? Because it fits the anti-First Amendment narrative perfectly. Harry's been on a crusade to regulate speech ever since he landed stateside, funding initiatives that push for stricter control over online platforms and endorsing policies to combat misinformation. His endorsement of Frank's book shows us exactly what he wants, a world where free speech is redefined to silence criticism of him and his bitch wife, while amplifying their own curated victim narratives. But here's where it gets deliciously ironic. Harry's entire platform is built on the very reckless speech he claims to oppose. Remember this Oprah interview? Let me jog your memory. Harry and Meghan sat down for a 2-hour sob story that turned the royal family into the world's biggest villains. They accused unnamed family members of racism, implied that the whole entire institution was complicit in driving Meghan to suicidal thoughts, and made zero effort to clarify any of it when the backlash was at its peak. Let's do a quick refresher to keep this in the front of everybody's minds, because we all know how Meghan and Harry want to sweep this under the rug. Harry and Meghan claim that a senior royal family member made racist comments about their son Archie's skin color. They refused to name names, but let the entire institution take the hit. The media frenzy that followed was massive, branding the royal family as racist and dividing public opinion in the UK and worldwide. The Queen herself, who spent her entire life in service to her people, was forced to endure this scandal in the twilight of her years. And Harry, he just sat back and let it happen, even as his grandfather, Prince Philip, was in the hospital clinging to life. What kind of compassionate advocate for truth and justice allows his 99-year-old grandfather to suffer through that? What kind of grandson lets his grandmother, the Queen of England no less, go to her grave thinking the world saw her as a racist? Harry knew exactly what he and Meghan were doing when they weaponized those allegations. They knew the damage their words would cause, and they said them anyway. Buckingham Palace, in an extraordinary show of restraint, responded to the Oprah interview with just 61 words. 61. The palace stated, "Recollections may vary," leaving the door open for Harry and Meghan to clarify, correct, or even retract their claims. But did they? Nope. They just let the narrative run wild while the royal family, Harry's family, took the heat. So when Harry endorses a book that rails against reckless speech and the harm it causes, forgive me, but Harry can piss off. He and Meghan have been some of the most reckless speakers out there, using their platform to sling accusations without evidence, leaving devastation everywhere they go. When you break down this chapter, you understand why it resonates so much with Harry's anti-speech agenda. The author paints a grim picture of the digital public square, describing it as a breeding ground for toxicity. She argues that platforms like X prioritize profit over accountability, allowing hate speech, conspiracy theories, and disinformation to thrive while the voices of women, minorities, and activists are drowned out or silenced. She advocates for reimagining the public square by introducing aggressive regulation that prioritizes fearless speech. Well, what does that mean? It's speech that aligns with progressive values and challenges entrenched power structures. But here's the catch. Someone has to decide which speech counts as fearless and which speech is reckless. And guess who gets to play speech referee? Not you or me. It's people like Prince Harry, privileged elites who think they know what's best for society. The author also criticizes the First Amendment's neutral stance on free speech, claiming that it's outdated and blind to the real-world harm caused by reckless speech. She argues that the legal framework should focus less on protecting everyone's right to speak and more on protecting marginalized groups from being harmed by speech. Translation, she wants to create a hierarchy where certain voices are privileged over others. Now you can see why Harry is gushing over this. It's basically a how-to manual for the censorship wish list. Remember, this is the same man who rants about misinformation while conveniently ignoring the fact that his and Meghan's Netflix specials and interviews have been repeatedly debunked for containing, you guessed it, misinformation. Hypocrisy much? This hypocrisy runs even deeper when you consider how Harry's actions align with his disdain for the First Amendment. Let's be clear, Prince Harry's endorsement of Chapter 4 isn't just about speech regulation. It's part of a larger pattern of undermining American civil liberties. Harry and Meghan have poured lots of money into organizations advocating for stronger censorship under the guise of combating misinformation and hate speech, as well as keeping our kids safe now. They're part of what many now call the censorship industrial complex, a network of governments, corporations, and NGOs working together to suppress dissenting voices. We can look at Harry and Meghan as prime examples of why regulating speech is so dangerous. If someone had regulated their speech before the Oprah interview, they would have cried censorship, and you know it. But when their lies and half-truths hurt others, suddenly censorship is noble because they don't want to hear it. Harry wants to be the arbiter of truth, but he's proven time and time again that his version of the truth is whatever benefits him and his wife. By pushing for tighter control over speech, Harry aligns himself with the globalist initiatives like Agenda 2030, which seek to centralize power and suppress dissenting voices. Under this framework, questioning the narrative becomes misinformation, and disagreeing with elites like Harry and Meghan become hate speech. This isn't about creating a fairer, safer public square. It's about consolidating control for those at the top. Let's be honest. And I'm not going to mince my words here when I say that censorship is dangerous. It's not going to stop hate. Hate is part of the human condition. All it's going to do is drive it underground. It doesn't protect the vulnerable. It actually emboldens the powerful. And it certainly doesn't foster democracy. It actually destroys it. 2020 election is a perfect example of how holding back information about the Hunter Biden laptop story influenced a lot of people's decisions. And let's not forget the talk around that vaccine and all the information that they held back from people on the harms that were being caused. So when you look at the past 4 years under this censorship regime that was in progress, you could see how badly our society was affected. I think we really need to shift our focus from putting more regulations, because I don't think it's going to solve anything, to more of cracking down on these so-called bot networks like the Sussex Squad. People being paid to go after and target others. I think there should be a law put in place that bans them completely from social media. You shouldn't be allowed to buy a whole cluster of people and give them the direction to just consistently target and harass and bully people. And that, I think, should be the focus. I guarantee the majority of users online who are operating independently, who just want a voice, they're not causing any harm. But when you see a lot of this inciting of hatred and violence, most likely is coming from paid organizations that have a political agenda, like Harry and Meghan. What Harry and Meghan stand for and propose is cloaked in the language of safety and inclusion, but it's a world where those voices are never heard. We've seen this happen time and time again, from the suppression of dissenting views when we questioned her pregnancy, to silencing many who just simply criticized Meghan for her bad behavior. By Prince Harry endorsing this author's vision for a tightly controlled public square, Harry is championing a world where the government and corporations and powerful elite decide what's true and what's not. And let's be real, does anybody want to be forced to believe the things that Harry and Meghan say and people like Harry and Meghan say? No, that's not democracy. That's what you call tyranny. So what do I take away from this? After going through this book, Prince Harry's endorsement of fearless speech isn't about protecting society. This is really about protecting himself. He rails against reckless speech while engaging in it. He demands compassion while showing absolutely none. And he advocates for censorship while ignoring the fact that the very First Amendment he despises protects his right to spout nonsense on a global stage. Harry and Meghan aren't champions of justice, they're champions of control. And if they succeed in reshaping free speech to fit their narrative, the rest of us will be left voiceless in their curated echo chamber. And that's fact. If you think about the time before Harry and Meghan came over to the United States, nobody knew anything about what this woman really was about. All we saw was this perfectly curated image of Meghan being this humanitarian, and oh, how coincidental, she was just like Diana. The United States ate it up. The scary thing about it was at that time, no one knew that information was being suppressed and people were being censored. Here in the United States, nobody thought, living in the land of the free, that our government was controlling the media. I have to give credit to Harry and Meghan for opening my eyes and showing me how corrupted and extremely biased the U.S. mainstream media is. It also shows me the powerful role that media plays in shaping people's thoughts and psychologically manipulating them. So when we look at the hate online that Harry so talks about, he has to understand that a majority of this is influenced by the media that is being put out there. Propaganda plays a huge role in all of this. So in addition to creating laws banning botnets that go after people to terrorize them, I think there should also be a reversal of that Steve Munt Act to make it prohibited to put any type of domestic propaganda onto American people. We also need to get back to some type of journalistic integrity, because right now, nobody at this point in time is taking any of these mainstream journalists seriously. They have done a lot of damage in so many different ways. It's the reason why the last 4 years have been a nightmare. And you can't let off the hook the social media companies who have been prioritizing one voice over the other, or in some cases, suppressing many voices in promotion of the agenda voice. Now, before I go, there's just a couple things that I want to point out that I noticed over the last couple days. Even though Meghan and Harry have been labeled as disaster tourists, I can't help but see similarities in things that they are doing that align with some of the things that these politicians have been doing. So when you look at the statement that Meghan and Harry gave about the LA fires and the resources that they listed, it was eerily similar to that of Barack Obama's. Barack Obama put his message up the day before Harry and Meghan put theirs up. Could Meghan have copied that? Possibly. But the point that I want to make here is that not only was the messaging similar, but also the resources that were put in the link through Time magazine of resources like World Central Kitchen. So you can come to the conclusion that it's just one big club with these people. But also, what was strikingly similar was the messaging from the president last night in his farewell speech.
Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies, told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
Now, is it a coincidence that Harry and Meghan put out a statement and then you have the worst president in history go ahead and talk about this in his farewell speech? Obviously, this is something that not only Harry and Meghan are bitter about, but also the Democrats, because in 2020, when they did have control of Facebook and were able to control the information and suppress other voices, they were able to take an election. I guarantee, had they been able to do the same thing that they did back in 2020, this election would have turned out a lot different. Nick Clegg would still have a job, and the fact checkers would still be in place. And also, voices like mine, no doubt, would be removed. The point that I want to make now, though, is with this similar messaging that Harry and Meghan put out there, obviously they are in support of this regime as well as the globalism that is being pushed with this agenda. We know this. Could it be that Meghan is now going to be groomed over the next 4 years and possibly be pushed into something at the end of 2028? God, I hope not. That's why it's so important that we continue to keep talking about this and reminding people that they're up to no good. And as much as they can try and rebrand and do all this stuff with PR, we have to keep putting in front of people's faces what they have done. A leopard does not lose its spots. And this woman, I feel, is not going to give up. She's going to continue to keep shoving herself in front of people and getting herself in with the so-called right people of the wrong party. As it stands now, her relationship with Gavin Newsom and his wife, let's say if Gavin Newsom decides to run for president in 2028 and they need a governor or they need another one to fill the Senate seat, Meghan is old, but she's not that old. And I think it's important that we don't take our eye off of her until justice is served and she's held accountable for the harm that she's caused to so many people. Because someone like that in government is extremely dangerous. And considering there's like a bottomless pit of money that's backing all this propaganda, you never know who the dark forces are that continues to keep shoving this woman in our faces. So as long as we have free speech, it's never going to happen. But if they succeed in doing what they did back in 2020, which Harry and Meghan seem to be taking this alternate angle that all these other censorship advocates are taking by going after the kids and doing this at a state level, no longer now at the federal level, we're going to be in trouble. So it's important we keep on them, we keep exposing them, and we continue to try and get somebody to hold them accountable. Just my opinion. So there you have it. Prince Harry's recommendation of this book, Fearless Speech, specifically Chapter 4, is just the latest chapter in his war against the First Amendment. He and Meghan want to trample on American civil liberties to create a world where speech is curated, controlled, and censored by the elite. But here's the thing, Harry. You don't get to rewrite the rules of freedom just because you don't like what people are saying about you. But what do you guys think? I'd love to know your thoughts. Definitely leave them in the comment section below. And as always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.